We can use some people like that. Anyway, no more text messages, no more ringtones. I'm sorry. This is called Dogs on a Plane. Again, it's a joke, my father. It goes like this. You can spot them by the flood beards, thought Professor Minnow, glancing beyond the whir of flight attendant activity up ahead of him in the aisle of this old Boeing 707 en route to Denver. One could easily identify the responsible men of his town, those who obeyed the emergency flood order to conserve water. None had shaved, and probably only slightly bathed in the past 2 weeks. If the smell didn't alert you first, turn around. You'll know them by the proverbial 7 days stubble. Minnow did it himself, idly, standing up and scanning the rows upon rows of passengers at his back, to no avail. It did, though, for a moment distract his attention from the in turn astounding distraction in the seat next to him. Minnow, see, savored nothing more than a cigar on a flight en route to a writer's conference. He smoked up the bulldog label, which for reasons he'd always been uncertain of, being possessed of a level of intellectual curiosity below that of what you might expect from a professor, came with a picture of a giant poodle as its emblem. Had he thought to inquire at the hometown Nashville-based tobacco products distributor? Tobacco products distributor of the brand, he would have found out it was the company's idea of a fine, sophisticated joke. He'd never laughed at it, which might tell you a little more about him still. The enjoyment of his Bulldog brand cigar on these plains of Denver was, however, being hampered by a very real miniature poodle in the lap of the old lady at his left. The poodle would not stop licking his arm, nor would the lady do anything to discourage the beast's invasion of his personal space. "Ooh, that's a widow baby, licky poo poo poo," she said, and after perhaps the 15th episode of the same, the professor pulled slowly on his cigar, a slow exhale, now directed squarely in the direction of the pair at his left. A woman, Mrs. Ida J. Hubbard, en route to visit grandchildren in a posh mountain suburb, had no part of the water conservation order, having driven for 3 hours from her own mountain cabin, as she and her husband were quite fond of calling the 3,000 square foot house nestled in the hillside in the Appalachian, to the flood-affected area to catch the flight. More importantly for Minnow, she insisted on talking to her dog in the above-described fashion to mask a growing irritation at the fact that not only the professor's smoking in this parallel existence where cigars were the normal run of things on planes. Cigars, she felt, did not belong on planes, in fact, not to mention the more natural effluvia emanating from the professor's armpits and clothes and, no doubt, crotch, particularly in this day and age. And the flight attendant, now bringing Professor Minnow a second whiskey and soda, would have agreed with Mrs. Hubbard had it not been the attendant's job to not think too much about the idiosyncrasies of her passengers. And unbeknownst to the hive mind of the passenger list and crew on this domestic service Boeing 707, the situation here was quickly reaching its crest point. Whittle baby licky poo poo poo's tongue was quickly extending for the 16th lick, just as Mrs. Hubbard was readying her lungs for a full-bore cough, the near-explosive simultaneity of which, for the professor, would send his arm in a reflex jerk away from the dog and coughing woman at his left. The drink, set just then on the pull-down tray in front of the professor, would catch the brunt of the professor's arms, force and fly straight up into the face of the waiting attendant. The denouement of the plastic cups arched. God damn it, the professor positively, or of course negatively, as the case may be, shrieked, then grabbed the miniature poodle by the neck and flung it with all his might through the window on their row, causing an unsafe drop in cabin pressure and prompting the domestic service 707's automatic safety systems to engage and drop the oxygen mask for the otherwise soon-to-be hypoxic passengers. Mrs. Hubbard groped for her own mask. The professor pulled slowly on his cigar, exhaling then before strapping his own mask on. Mrs. Hubbard, drinking in the fresh air, watched him with a contemptuous detachment now, her whittle baby licky poo poo poo, no doubt halfway to its demise somewhere in the Texas panhandle below. When the professor finally bothered to look her way, she raised the middle finger of her right hand to him and grabbed a bulldog label cigar and threw it, too, out the window. It joined a stream of gathering detritus from half-filled cups and paper napkins and foil peanut wrappers, the peanuts themselves, which whipped down the aisle and out over the wing of the plane, a seat by which Mrs. Hubbard always chose on her trips to Denver if she could, to avoid the vertigo she felt when she could actually see the ground below. Among the maelstrom of detritus, the professor managed now to return Mrs. Ida J. Hubbard's lewd gesture, and behind the oxygen mask, he smiled. For out on the wing of the plane, he spies, flapping in the wind, the old woman's poodle, gamely yelping, hanging on for dear life, tongue flapping from the side of its mouth, in which, in further confirmation, his love for the eventfulness of many a flight, so many a flight. Or maybe that was the growing hypoxia talking among his synapses, a quite curious object in that dog's mouth. His crude gesture quickly turned to another now, for Mrs. Hubbard to look, out there, look, and she did, where her little baby licky poo-poo-poo had caught in its jaws neither the cigar nor the loads of peanuts, sustenance flying now in a stream out into the air at 50,000 feet, but rather a bright yellow brick. Yeah.
God damn, son.
Mrs. Ida J. Hubbard cried in both horror and relief, and the professor threw up his hands, leaned back into his seat, closed his eyes, and impatiently waited for the next opportunity to smoke. Opportunities by which he measured his days. His arms rose high, hands clenched into fists. His eyes closed, triumphant. He didn't for a moment consider that that last cigar, wasted at 50,000 feet, could have been his last. Anyway, thanks, guys.